Hey, what's happening? Before we jump into the show, I wanted to see if you had any music on a hard drive. You have a band, you have a project, and you want to self-release your own music. Well, there's an easy way to do it. You can go to distrokid.com/VIP/hyphenate and go get your music up on all the streamers. You keep 100% of your royalties, and you can get 30% off by using this code. It's a great, easy way to get your music up on the streamers and share it with your fans, your friends, your family, your mom, your dog, everybody. Everyone wants to hear it. But go to distrokid.com/VIP/hyphenate, HYPHENATE, and send me the link. I want to hear it too. Send your mom the link. Send your dog the link. They all want to hear it too.
There was a point at which there was like two Black Flags touring or some iteration, like Greg Ginn's thing and Rollins doing something. And I asked him kind of sarcastically, like, what's up with that? Like, what do you think about that? And he said very seriously, look, punk is gospel. There is absolutely a spiritual element. And the idea of holding space in a room where everyone is invited to sing along, literally, that has value. Like, that's important to people.
What's happening, everybody? Thank you so much for tuning into Hyphenate Halftime. No, it's Hyphenate Regular Time with me, Randy Randall, your host. Halftime is the show I do every Monday. I just had a very fun halftime record this weekend, or this week. It came out on Monday, a few days ago, with my 11-year-old son jumping on the mics to help review band names. So if you have a band and then you would like me to listen to your music, specifically, if you have a band that you think I should play on the show, I can do the outros of some of these shows with your band's music. I would love to hear it regardless, but we came up with a fun segment where my 11-year-old son will review your band name and tell you and me what he thinks of the band name, and also what his 11-year-old friends at school would think of your band name. The first band we had to kick this off was the Scared Little Toasters coming out, just Scared Little Toaster coming out of London, England. They sent a track in last week, and my 11-year-old Ryder said his friends at school would never have thought of a name like that. He thought it was wholly original and was excited about it. He said it was good. He passed the 11-year-old muster, which, from a marketing standpoint, you can't beat those metrics. That's really valuable insight and information into youth marketing for whatever creative projects you may have. So please send your band's music. Send me links to where your music is online, where it's SoundCloud, Bandcamp, DistroKid. They're a sponsor. You can always use the code, or no, what is it? Go to the link, distrokid.com/VIP/hyphenate to get all of your music up on streamers. But I want to hear it. Before you send it to them, send it to me. I want to hear it, and I want to have my 11-year-old son review it for the podcast. So I'm looking forward to hearing those. Today's show, in keeping with the idea of tomorrow being Valentine's Day, a soulless capitalist invention to sell flowers and diamonds and cards and perfume and whatever else people want to be sold or bought. I have a very incredible writer, thinker, and person, Mr. Seth Lorinczi. He comes from the DC music scene and has done a lot of extensive writing and archiving and journaling and memoirization. Is that the correct word? Writing about his life. His latest book is called Death Trip, a Post Holocaust Psychedelic Memoir. What a perfect book to think about on Valentine's Day, right? There's always something about love and celebrations and life and these exciting spring, fertile times that I think my brain leads into, the psychedelic and the morose. Seth is super creative and very thoughtful and very sensitive to the world and incredibly insightful. You will hear the interview coming up. My umming and ahhing and bumbling through this, I'm doing the best I can to keep up with him. But you should go check out more about Seth Lorinczi. You can go to his website, which is his name, SETHLORINCZI.com. I apologize if I'm butchering the pronunciation. You can also go to 2trackseth.substack.com. That's his Substack, where he publishes incredible writings and dispatches from his travels. Where else is good to look for Seth? He has so much rad stuff. We talk about it here at the end, but I just want to make sure to give a shout out and some plugs in the beginning. You can also find him on the Instagram at Seth Lorinczi. That's SETHLORINCZI. And like I said, he's got the Substacks, he's got the books, and go buy a book. Go check it out. Go subscribe to the Substack. It's really, really interesting. He resides in the Pacific Northwest now, but originally came from the DC scene. Talks a lot about punk and independent music and his adventures through that, as well as, adventures in the psychedelic landscape. So, without further ado, let's jump into my interview with Seth. Thank you so much, Seth, for being on the show and for taking the time. And, look forward to hearing everyone's music. Please send in your links. That's hyphenate halftime at gmail.com. And you can also find me on the Instagrams as well at Randy S. Randall. And I want to hear your bands. I want to hear what you guys are up to. I want to hear what's going on out there in the world. I loved hearing Scared Little Toaster and loved giving them a shout out. So hit me up. Let's talk music. Let's talk drugs. Let's talk books. I want to hear all of these fun, exciting stories that you have to share as well. All right, here we go. Seth, thank you so much for coming on the show. How are you?
Hi.
It's great to meet you.
I'm great. I mean, all things considered.
Sure. Yeah. I mean, we are in an interesting time.
Oh my God.
When will times not be so interesting?
When we're dead.
Does it get less interesting than you think?
Or
does it just begin? It's a whole other...
I don't have proof, but I suspect. Who knows?
You would be the person to ask.
Yeah. Maybe it's totally wild. Who knows?
Well, we're here. You have a new book out, or your latest book is Death Trip, a Post Holocaust Psychedelic Memoir.
Yes.
So things reflecting on death and life after death. Is that under the purview of this, or this is more
kind of
the feeling of the death from the living?
Well, I mean, it's about going back in time, but also going back geographically, going to Hungary, where my father's family was from, and just trying to figure out what happened to them. Because as I reached middle age, I realized there's all these. I don't know. There's all these programs running in the background, and I don't know whose they are. And what I started to realize is that the experience is
your internal loop, your internal thinking, your programming in your brain.
Yeah, basically. I mean, one way to think about it is, look, we're all born into the families we're born into, but we're each handed something at birth based on our family history, based on the experiences of the people who raised us, based even on what's called epigenetics. Basically, the life experiences of the people who of your parents, they don't rewrite your DNA, but they change how it's expressed. So for instance, if they lived through trauma, you're more likely to experience things like heart disease, schizophrenia, obesity, all these really sort of maladaptive responses based on what they lived through. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I mean, I think the broader sort of the macro of this sort of expression would be like a nature versus nurture.
Yeah,
I think what you're suggesting is something that almost goes past that, or almost blends into the two. That the nature is developed based on the nature is the nurture. The nurture of the last generation is what's given across as the natural sort of gift. If you were just to be born, to different parents, you would still be genetically programmed to express certain things that had occurred in their life.
Yeah. And so basically, I get to a certain age and I just feel like basically my life is not working the way I think it should be. Can I figure out what these other, I call them shadow programs, but whatever, I think you get what I'm talking about.
Sure.
Where do they come from? What happened to them? What happened to the people who raised me? and how do I get through this? How do I find a different
I
way of
love it.
relating to the world?
I love it. Let's start a little bit back with with the biographical story and sort of we how we were just talking before the mics were rolling, and we do have friends in common. Where did you start out? Where does your biography begin, and
Well,
sort of what?
literally in Milwaukee, Wisconsin, but I moved to DC when I was 3. So I was, I count myself a Washingtonian. And when I was a teenager, I fell into the punk scene there, and that that was my upbringing. Like that's what shaped me. I left home, semi early at 17. I started living in group houses, and I basically just turned my back on the straight world, and and fell into punk, fell into music, and that was it. I thought that was going to
This
be the rest of my life.
this is the DC punk scene of the mid to late
You
'80s.
got it.
Got it. Okay. And then you're playing guitar, you're playing bass, you're playing everything. What is sort of your role in that
I was
world?
really a bass player.
Okay.
Yeah, when I was a kid, I would hang out underneath my mother's piano. Both my parents were musicians actually. I still have the piano, amazingly, but I remember, trying all the keys. I'm like 3, 4 years old, and when I got down low, the bass notes would just stir something in my body. You know what I mean? Like I felt that on a physical level, and of course we are. They're
Yeah,
vibrations. We're feeling them, but that
absolutely.
just that just totally drew me in, and that's where it began.
Incredible. So you fall into the punk scene and sort of find a new, sort of adoptive family, appropriate to that age group. The sort of the breaking away from, the biological family into this communal family. And then where do you go from there? What were some of the bands you played with, and what was sort of your experience in that punk scene? How did that go?
Well, I the first kind of band of any note was called Vile Cherubs, and we were kind of an anomaly in DC because this is the mid '80s, and we're playing what we called '60s punk, which was like bands like the Standells and the Music Machine and the Chocolate Watch Band and stuff that kind of is kind of like above ground now, but was a lot harder to find back then. And I was totally captured by the mystery of it. Like 20 years before now, there was this whole subculture of people making really raw sounding, snotty, dirty sounding music. And then they kind of disappeared. Like, what happened? Like, the idea that people a generation before me were kind of interested in the same things and doing, following the same roots as me was really just fascinating. And it was also, frankly, that was a way to sort of set ourselves apart from the rest of the music that was happening around us. Mid '80s, it's kind of the end of the first hardcore era. Um, I think of bands like Ignition, which is a big influence on me, who I loved, by the way, but they're playing something very different. They're playing sort of like gloomy UK late '70s punk. Bands like Fire Party, Holy Rollers, and of course Fugazi gets started around then too. And all these amazing bands, but I think the idea of setting, at least me, I'll speak for myself, not my band, setting myself apart and being into something kind of different, that really spoke to me. And I think that's been a thread throughout my life.
Yeah, I'm really embracing that sort of that punk ethos of not fitting in. When all the punks start shaving their heads and wearing the same clothes,
Well,
that it
yeah,
sort of becomes a new uniform. Like, well, this isn't what punk is about.
and that's
You
and
know, like
that's of course that's the
yeah,
tension in punk, right? Like, yeah, we're all in a tribe
yeah,
together, except we're all different, right? Like, are,
yeah,
are we all wearing the same uniform?
yeah. You got to fit in, but you got to be different. Can't be. Yeah,
Which is, I mean, I'll say this, like, I in a lot of ways, I can't compare the DC scene to anywhere else because that's where I grew up. That was my only experience. But when I began to tour and travel later, I was in a band called Circus Lupus after that. Um, I realized like, oh, the DC scene was really, really unique. Like by the time I was entering the scene, it was not a shaved head, leather jackets, boots. It was all sorts of people looking all sorts of different ways. And that had a real effect on me, you know?
yeah. It's incredible. And some of the members, of Vile Cherubs, there was Tim Green, who had then later on Nation of Ulysses, right? Was Tim in the band,
Yep.
Vile Cherubs?
Totally.
Yep. Okay.
Totally.
Yep. Yep. And then and I forget who else was in the band. I remember I was just looking at it, but
You
other
know, they
members
didn't.
of it was
Jesse Quitzland ended up in a band called Dusters. He also did a really brilliant solo record called Please. And what's funny about the Please record is, which I was involved in too, but you can't find it literally, because what he did was he went to thrift stores and bought up just piles and piles and piles of old records, and then silk screened a design on top of them. But no two records are the same. So I've actually found Please records in record stores, and people have no idea what they are, which is which
wow.
is I mean, it's so brilliant on one level and so totally wrongheaded and counterintuitive on the other. Anyway,
Yeah, well, it's almost like a reverse shoplifting idea,
kind
just
of, yeah. It's like
sneaking your
implanting.
records on the shelf.
Yeah,
Yeah.
but
That's great.
Jesse ended up. He didn't. I think he plays music still, but he became a guitar tech. He's a really brilliant fixer and builder of things. And then the drummer Ben went on. I don't think he played music after that, but he's a school teacher in New York. A really, really sweet, lovely, brilliant person.
Wow,
Yeah.
awesome.
Yeah.
And then post music, where do you or post Circus Lupus?
Yeah.
What happens?
I really felt it was time for me to get out of DC. At a certain point, I was kind of spinning my wheels, and I felt like it was time for the next step, whatever that was. And I went out to San Francisco to go to cooking school. Actually, I'd always been interested in food, and that's what led me to writing. It turned out that I hate working in restaurants. It's awful. It's brutal work. I don't have the temperament for it at all. But I could write about food. And so that's what I did in San Francisco. And I sort of dabbled in music. Like I couldn't quite give it up entirely, but I turned my focus towards writing then. And the two have kind of danced together ever since.
And then tell me about where you find yourself here with on the background of this book. I would love to hear more about it's your journey with it sounds like it's bridging on family tree, this kind of a larger group experience that we all sort of have has taken over the world, this 23andMe, or this kind of finding your roots, but also in a more kind of psychedelic or mentally expanded way. I don't know if I'm doing it justice.
No,
but I think just to sort of plant a seed for new listeners or for people who would be interested in the book.
Yeah. No,
tell me about that journey.
Yeah, that's fair. I mean, basically, like the book starts with my music life falling apart. I'm trying to make a living as a composer, as a recording engineer, like as sort of all around music person, and it's just not working. Like I'm not finding success, and I'm not making music I really care about. So kind of my sense of meaning in the world dissolves, and at the same time, my marriage is on the brink of dissolving as well. Like basically all the crutches are gone, all the foundations of my life are falling apart, and a couple things happen at this point. One is that I literally rediscovered my father's memoirs. He had died about 20 years before he had. I'd cajoled him into writing down some of his reminiscences of growing up in Hungary in the 1930s. And I'd read them once in the 90s, and then I just put them away in a filing cabinet. Like life just kind of went on. So at this moment, when everything's kind of dissolving, I rediscover this sort of map, like this family tree. Like, oh, I have a backstory. It wasn't totally unknown to me, but I really had forgotten most of it. The other thing that happens at this point is that my wife and I go to counseling to try to figure out how to separate in a half decent manner. And after a couple sessions, the therapist very innocently asks, "Would you like to try a session with MDMA?" And we do. And this is a big spoiler for the book, but my wife and I are still together, It absolutely saved our marriage. I think it saved my life, frankly. But
And
yeah, go ahead.
what was your experience? Oh, sorry, Val. I'll just jump in for a second with a question. What was your experience with drugs? Or I mean, obviously the DC scene was kind of famous for being straight edge and being very no drugs, no alcohol, no cigarettes kind of feeling. But by this point in your life, what was your experience with drugs or psychedelics or anything? In that, were you familiar with them, or was it a recreational thing, or where did that find
No,
you? When
they
someone
didn't.
suggests something like that,
They didn't.
yeah.
At this point, they didn't play any role in my life. As a teenager, however, remember I was saying I had to set myself apart from the other punks?
Mm.
No, the Vile Cherubs were absolutely addicted to taking whatever we could find, and we tripped together, we smoked weed together, we drank tons.
Gotcha.
Um,
Gotcha.
so yeah,
And that may lead to some of the 60s pop, sort of psychedelic pop, oriented
absolutely.
sort of music may have reflected that.
Well,
Okay. I didn't want to assume anything, but that could be, yeah, I could
no,
imagine those going together.
well. So we were talking earlier about our shared connection, Andy Coronado, and of course his label LG, which is putting out or reissuing records from that era. The Vile Cherubs remixed our original demos on 4-track, and the album is called Lysergic Lamentations for lysergic diethylamine acid. So
Yeah.
the
LSD.
pretty
Got
big
it.
hint
Yeah.
in there.
Okay. Okay. But by this point, you're aged and matured,
Yeah.
maybe, or not matured, but at least you're further on down the journey of life and with a wife and things. And so the drugs and LSD and psychedelics weren't really part of your lifestyle at that time.
Not at all.
Okay, got it. So what was the thought? I mean, your wife had you and your wife ever done that kind of a drug together before? I mean, was this a normal thing? I guess that hits me as kind of coming sideways. Like, I don't know what I would do if I was in that position.
Yeah, it totally came sideways.
Okay.
But we're in such desperate straits that what do we have to lose?
Desperate times call for desperate measures. Sure.
Yeah, and I'll say this. I mean, psychedelics are not for everyone. They are not a cure-all or a panacea by any means. However, it's really, really hard to pull over from your life and get meaningful perspective. We're always looking through our own eyes. We're always looking through our own backstory. Psychedelics, and MDMA is not, technically a psychedelic, but let's just put it in the same bucket. Psychedelics have the power to help uncouple us and see, even if just for a few hours, see through the stories. Because stories are how we make meaning of our life, right? This happened to me, and that's why I am this way, or this is how I move through the world. And
kind of like what we're doing here. We're applying a biography to an identity, to
absolutely.
A person. I mean,
yeah,
it's yeah. We're using our performative choreographed sounds to to express to another person this dance of identity.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? The idea of language, language doesn't really exist.
Well, and
it's two people with a shared experience who can click at each other long enough to sort of get something about the other person.
Yeah, and I would say, this is kind of not to go meta or anything, but every time, I'm talking about memories and the experiences that form me. Every time we talk about a memory, we're not actually accessing that memory. We're accessing the last time we talked about that memory. So it's continually evolving, which is
it's like a game of telephone, which can also be adapted or be changed or mutated in its retellings.
You're playing telephone with yourself. And that's one of the interesting things about writing memoir, which is that you're saying this is the story, even while you know that you are writing it literally and figuratively. You're changing it by writing it.
Mm-hmm. But does that freeze it in some ways, or then now all retellings will revert? It's like your start point in a video game. We're going to go back to the book as that'll be the formative version of it. I won't continue to retell. I see.
And it's interesting being at this age. I'm almost 54, and I look back at I write a lot about the DC punk scene. I have a Substack, and that's kind of my main focus. And I'm at the age now in which I can see that those stories have kind of hardened into fact, right? Ian Mackay has been interviewed so many times telling his stories, and no diss whatsoever, but those stories have now become the story, and they're not. They're his perception, and each time he's touching on that memory, he's changing it too. So what I'm really interested in are untold stories. What are, and knowing that I'm changing them as I'm writing them too. But what are the less told stories? Like, what are the people who didn't get their stories told, and those stories have every bit as much value as the sort of larger ones, the better told ones.
Absolutely. Well, yeah. Ian is very generous with his time. He shares these stories when asked. I don't see him necessarily going out of his way, but he's made it available to where people. He's very generous with that. But I always, as a fan of that music in that time period, I'm always, again, on the touring and the traveling I've gotten to do, whenever I meet somebody who's there, or me and my bandmate in No Age, we'll always sit, we'll let people bend our ear for hours. Like, what was it like? What is this? What was your experience? And again, those that especially, there's a lot of lines and a lot of the stories go, well, I wasn't straight edge, so here's how I saw it. And you go, okay, this is a different story. There's a very different world that was happening there. And it's not a judgment on one side or the other, but it's just a different experience.
Yeah.
And I think that was one line, that we noticed over the years, that, there was just a different experience with that world. And like any scene, there's the people who are in the scene and outside of the scene, or sometimes in, sometimes out, and they become legendary parties, legendary houses, legendary, these legends, whether it was ever as good as it was meant to be, or depicted.
Well,
through
I mean, you say legend. Legend is a kind of story.
Right? Yeah. So MDMA is I've not done it. I've had friends who have done it, and I've had people explain to me, but it's something else. It's almost like a transportation device, or it's a sense of like the God particle.
No.
I think comes up in discussion. That's not MDMA. No.
Okay. No, I wouldn't say that. What you're describing sounds to me like DMT or 5-MeO DMT.
Oh, okay. Maybe I'm wrong.
Yeah, different. Yeah. I mean, MDMA. There is also MDA, but MDMA is it's sometimes described as an intactogen, basically sort of like fostering empathy and touch and relational dynamics are especially sort of highlighted in it. And there is a psychedelic edge to it somewhat, but for me at least, it really works more on the kind of the emotional core. What my wife and I experienced in that first session, and there'd be others that would follow, was that just for a few hours we got to float above story. All the stories we told ourselves and each other about who the other person was, how we had to relate, and of course all of our grievances and all of our long history together. We just got to sort of pop our heads above that for a bit. And that in and of itself was like the key in the lock. Because once you recognize that something is just a story, and maybe not the whole story, or maybe not even the truth, well, what happens then? Right? Like you lose these templates of how you have to relate to one another. And hopefully the invitation is to write new ones. And that's what we ended up doing.
Wow. That sounds beyond transformative in a interpersonal relationship like that. When seeking counseling, to not just better understand the person, but to sort of almost wipe all the pieces off the table and reset the game in some ways.
It resets the game, and of course you can return to that game if you want.
Sure.
There's something about MDMA and other drugs too, but MDMA in particular has something called a critical window, which basically for a couple weeks or so after you take it, things really are up in the air. And it's a chance the way I've heard it described is it's a chance to relearn early life experiences. Like when we're kids and we learn that bonding has value, meaning we feel comforted, we recognize that we're part of a social group or a family. So it's an opportunity to relearn those lessons and sort of rejoin each other. The problem is, if you take MDMA and you go back into a stressful or abusive dynamic, you're going to relearn all those harmful lessons all over again. The drug itself doesn't change you. It gives you an opportunity to change yourself.
Wow. Sounds powerful.
It's amazing
What
stuff.
and where and does this sort of open you up down a further journey to sort of explore your own story? So it's when it's that this sounds like this experience is in a relationship to your wife, literally, like how you define those stories within your relationship to each other. But does this open up the bigger question of what else is happening?
Totally.
How else can that be reset?
Totally. Absolutely. Yeah. Because remember, the other element that's happening now is that I'm rediscovering my own family history. And I'm recognizing, oh, well, first of all, the people that raised me, A, were Holocaust survivors, but B, they lived through some of the most disruptive events of the last century. I mean, they lived through, my grandfather fought in the First World War. They survived the influenza pandemic. They survived the Second World War. They survived socialism. I mean, really, like as I sort of recognize what they lived through, I realized, like, oh my God, of course this is having an effect on me and how I view the world. And I'd never really pulled over and realized that before. So once I did, yeah, it basically, the book becomes kind of a detective story, like gathering the clues, reconnecting with people, reading the history, and eventually the only thing left to do is to go to Hungary and to try to figure out what happened to them.
Wow. And this is all sort of done with your father's, de facto memoirs as sort of your guide. I mean, did you look out to other resources? Was there other research that you were able to pull into this?
I had to, because as soon as I rediscovered my father's memoirs, and it's only like 20 pages, it's like a Cliff's Notes.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
As soon as I did, I immediately realized, oh, he's not telling me the truth. Like, he's
like all good memoirs.
Yeah.
It's his version of the story.
It's his version of the story. Exactly.
Yeah.
And also, when it verges close to something painful or traumatic, he shies away. And he even says so near the end. He says, but he admits how painful it is to revisit these memories that he's not revisited in 50 years. And he says something like, but I have to, if you're to understand, the central chapter in our family story. But he never does. It's like we get to the Battle of Budapest near the end of the Second World War, and it's like the film just stops. It's almost, in the book, I say it's like he was hit mid-sentence, and he never tells us. So I realized that I needed to go there and find out for myself. And again, I won't give more of the story away.
Sure, yeah. You want people to get the book? No, I won't. No spoilers. But I am just so curious. What I think, just sort of setting the stage, because I think a lot of people can relate to this, and I think that's one area to sort of like, if anything, the intense interest in this kind of thing, and the inspiration to go seek out your book and to kind of dig into it further is, sort of how these stories and how this sort of the setup, the prelude to the story of coming to the book is sort of universally relatable to everyone's story. So I'd love to kind of explore that area. Like, what was your relationship like with your father, before coming to the book and coming to do all this?
By the end of his life, there was nothing left to fix. He died when I was 27, 26.
Mm.
We were
How old
good.
was he?
He was almost 68. When I was a teenager, go ahead.
Oh, no, sorry. I was just going to say, what was your relationship like with him?
Yeah, it was pretty fraught. He was absent for most of my childhood. And then when I entered adolescence and really began rebelling, he was just like, nope, not having anything to do with this, not going to engage with it. I mean, come on, that's the classic punk story, right? Like punk is the father wound. Our authority, like, we can't trust authority. Our authority had disappeared, so we have to say fuck it and try to find it ourselves. But I really, in late teenagehood, I really sought him out and reconnected. I mean, I take credit for that, because I don't think he would have. And I said, look, I'm your son. You need to know me as I am, not as you think I should be. So by the time he died, which is, again, this is like 6, 7, 8 years later, we were good. I loved him. Like, I took care of him at the end of his life. That was a deep honor to me, a deeply transformative experience. But he could only take it so far. You know what I mean? Like, he had so many repressed memories, so many traumatic memories, things he couldn't touch on, things he wouldn't touch on. And the way I like to say it now is that my relationship with him is way deeper than it ever was when he was alive, because I know, or I believe I know, what he lived through and why he made the choices he did.
It's interesting. And what do you do with that, or how does that affect you now moving forward, having this deeper relationship with your father, although he's not here?
Yeah.
How does that affect your life as you see it?
Most of all, it guides me as a father.
I was going to ask, if you have children as well.
Yeah, I'm actually I'm sitting in my daughter's room because it's a quiet place and she's at school right now. She's almost 18, and I keeping the relationship close and honest, and owning my mistakes are really, really important. And also being, like, this is not a podcast on fatherhood, but
they all kind of are. Like you said, punk is all about the fathers. I think podcasts, are always about, the intergenerational relationships in one way or another. I think it's a time for a lot of people to kind of meditate, within their own sort of journey. That's why I think was very interested to interview to talk about this. I think it ultimately serves as that underpinning of a lot of stories.
Yeah,
is sort of how people relate to their past and sort of how they bring it forward. And then we as listeners, we put ourselves on that journey too. Like, what would I do if I was in that situation?
Sure.
There's a bit of that meta sort of relationship, idea. We want to hear these stories and kind of go along for that same journey.
Well, you also mentioned a minute ago the universality of these stories, and that's actually been a huge surprise and a gift since I published the book. It's I honestly don't believe my story is important in any way, shape, or form. Not my personal story. My family story, maybe it's of interest, but for me, it's the transformation. It's where did you start, where did you end, and how did you do it, and what are those tools that we actually all have. And now the book's been out 6 months or so, and I do book tours. I travel around and talk about it and meet with people, and over and over and over again, people come up to me and they say, I would love to write my family story. I would love to understand my family story, but I feel blocked. I don't have time, or it doesn't feel important enough, or no one would care. And all these reasons that we give ourselves not to go into backstory. And what I say, and it's ironic, I'm actually teaching a class on this tomorrow, and I'll be doing some further virtual ones in the new year. What I say is, you're right, no one does care about your story. Your story is probably not that important, but it's vital to you, because understanding where you came from and what those shadow programs are, when you bring those into the light and above the surface, it changes you. Everything becomes less personal. You're able to be more present for yourself and the people in your life, and to relate to their own struggles and understand that it's not all about you, actually, that nothing is personal. And it brings you into the present instead of living in the past. And if my book had sold 0 copies, it would still be a total win for me, because it allowed me to step out of unconsciousness, really, and self-absorption and being defended, and into being someone who could actually be of service to others. Although, trust me, I'm still hugely self-absorbed.
That's the great gift and the great burden, right, of any thinker. But the idea of being able to almost, I don't know how you frame it, but I mean, processing intergenerational trauma in the way of sitting with it and having a place for it. I think in your own sort of psychic map, what I mean, that it's not the itch that's always calling out to be scratched, and it's sort of it's a part of it becomes a piece of the overall tapestry that you stand above or stand with or work with, rather than have it muffling you and kind of smothering you. The sort of unknown, the ocean of thoughts and questions that you could almost feel like you're drowning in,
Yeah.
then becomes something you stand above, and that you a wave you surf. I don't know. I'm sure there's a lot of metaphors there that could help work through the idea of processing trauma, or making friends with, the sort of your childhood, or these types of, structures. There's different architecture
Yeah.
of the inner mind, but
look,
something along those lines.
100%. And the way I like to describe it is, before starting this work, all those voices, all those sort of tape loops is another metaphor I love. It's also,
I like that as a Stockhausen fan.
Yeah. I mean, also, when I was a musician or a recording engineer, tape delay was maybe my favorite effect of all. I just love how it works, the mechanics of it, and of course the sonics of it. But I was running on these tape loops that had been implanted decades before I was even born, and they were all internal. I couldn't see them. I wasn't even aware of them. Now they are in front of me, meaning I see them happening. Doesn't mean I don't feel them. I will still feel contracted or defensive, or I'm in danger. I got to change something about this situation. But I see it, and recognizing it, and then gently saying, "Thank you. We're okay. We're not in danger. Let's try a different way of relating to this." That process is almost instantaneous now, where before it was not even a possibility.
Yeah, this idea of being able to, as things come up in your daily life, instead of being, I think the word, has taken on many different meanings, but triggered, or being emotionally reactive to a situation that is being off, that is almost setting off a domino effect of past trauma or past understandings or defensiveness. Being able to see that, oh, here's a new daily offense, or something that comes in to you rather aggressive, and go, oh, I don't have to react to this. You're not going to tumble my house of cards internally. I'm going to be able to go, okay, I see where you're at, and respond to that without bringing the heft of generations, or at least your own personal drama, to this person who just said, we're out of soy milk. They're like, I never got what I wanted as a kid. This is all your fault. I'm going to rip down your coffee stand because you don't have, what I'm asking you for, and you are now a surrogate for my mother who never loved me, and we're all going to, this is going to make this whole thing about me, and you cause a big fuss, and then you suffer from that embarrassment and shame and spiral down.
Yeah, and again, life becomes way less personal. Nothing is directed against you.
Yeah.
It's really freeing.
And this process is what you went through when writing the book. Were you going through a personal sort of therapy as well with this? Like you said, you had the couples therapist, but did you have a personal therapist you worked with in doing this as well?
Actually, very, very little. I mean, I'm Jewish, so I've had plenty of therapy in my life. No, honestly, like the book is really a journey through psychedelics, from MDMA and then into ayahuasca and then 5-MeO DMT. And eventually,
tell me a little bit about this. I'm not familiar with these drugs.
So ayahuasca is it's a sort of thick, very vile tasting brew that's created by boiling two plants together. That one contains DMT, the other activates it, and it's been used in the Amazon for thousands of years as a sort of oracle divination tool. It basically slows down the absorption of DMT so that it lasts hours, not, DMT itself lasts like something like 5 or 10 minutes. What's important about it is that it's ritually consumed in a circle, like in a ceremony with anywhere from a few to a couple dozen people. And there's just a sort of container building that happens, which again brings me back to the punk scene and the idea of being stuffed into a sweaty, gross little room with a couple dozen people you care deeply about. There's a communal aspect, and that's a really big deal. It's not just about, I need therapy, I need support, and I need to change my life. It's, we're all doing this work, yes, for ourselves, and also we're holding each other. And that was a really big deal. Then the other significant medicine, no one in this world calls them drugs, The other medicine is 5-MeO-DMT. I think that's what you were referring to earlier when you said the God molecule. Uh, it's some people describe it as the source code for all other psychedelics. It's unbelievably powerful. And I won't drone on about it, but I'll say there's one experience I write about in the book, very brief, probably only a few minutes at most, but it was an absolute reboot and reset of me and my life on this earth, and not for everyone, but I'm deeply grateful for it.
And how does this, as you're doing this and you're exploring your family tree, what is, maybe kind of speak to a little bit the relationship, or the sort of the one, how one interplays with
Yeah,
the other?
yeah. It's, I think, understanding on a somatic level, like I'm reading history and I'm reconnecting with a couple family members who know a little bit more than I do, but that's kind of intellectual work. In the medicine realm, and some people believe that DMT does take you to another dimension. I can't comment on that. Maybe, who knows? Um, but it becomes really somatic, and I understood on a deep sense level. Oh, maybe this is what the experience of hiding, literally, and denying who you are, because if you don't, you will be killed. Maybe those experiences that the people who raised me went through, I can have a deeper communion with it and understand how it's affecting me, and also in some psychic way hold them and heal them as well, because that's the healing they could do. And that sounds pretty woo, I know, but I'm struck by how many people in the non-psychedelic therapeutic world say the exact same thing. Like, doing this generational work is healing back in time and healing forward in time too. It's not just you.
And
Yeah.
and I mean, I mean, I think I can kind of hold both, true in my head at the same time. But I guess just for clarity, or to sort of speak on it a little bit, I mean, is it almost in your way finding forgiveness for past
Oh my
generations,
God.
or is it a literal, I mean, communing with past spirits and sort of granting them and almost some type of paranormal type of freedom?
Yeah.
I mean, and what I mean, I guess it can kind of exist on planes
Yeah. No, it's
simultaneous, or
it's
yeah.
both. Absolutely.
Hmm.
Absolutely both. And I don't, some people I think look for evidence in these experiences. Like, no, this proves I had a past life and I was a French nobleman in 1781. I'm not looking for receipts in that way. I don't need to prove anything like that. But that sense of psychic communion, and also just having a deeper, I think, compassion, for the people who came before and what they had to live through and what they gave up in order for me to be born and to have an easy, comfortable life. Um, that's a really huge deal. That's a really huge deal, and it gives me forgiveness. It lends forgiveness for them, and it increased my capacity for compassion 1,000-fold, just for all people, not just my family.
And I think that's hugely important just on its own. And, if nothing else were to come from any of these experiences, but just increasing that sort of the empathetic sort of view towards the world and that compassion for others. I mean, there's a huge sort of
One of the,
service component in that too, just finding your place in relationship to the world,
what
and not just of your past, but how you can help and sort of be of service to the rest of, sort of the globe, and or at least in your community, or as that spreads outwards.
one of the biggest problems I have with psychedelic medicine is that, for one, it's being jammed into a Western healthcare model, which is, I think, really harmful to everyone involved. But the other thing is that it's being pushed as a therapeutic, basically like a supercharged Prozac. And for me, and maybe this is because I grew up in the punk scene, um, I don't think you can separate it from the communal aspect and the notion that there is a spiritual dimension to this. Absolutely, it's not about I need to get better so I can life hack my way to wealth. It's so that I can be of service to the people who don't have access or don't have resources or don't have a way of touching on these experiences, you know.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. If you, it's one of those things that's problematically easy to forget, like that everything fits into that narrative of more wealth, to achieve the wealth you were born to deserve.
Right.
You deserve, you were born into this wealth paradigm pyramid scheme of being an American. I have a thing that comes up frequently on the podcast with people I speak with about, um, I think coming from sort of the punk world that I was in, and then kind of it overlapped a lot with noise and noise musicians, and I've come with this noise musician anonymous. Like that, I had to come to to be able to admit that I am a noise musician, and meaning that I like to go to rooms with anywhere from 5 to 10 people, and for hours at a time, listen to noise and play noise at each other.
I see you and respect you, Randy.
Yes.
You're safe here.
That this happens, and oftentimes a lot of money is put, way more money is spent on equipment and ways of doing this than is ever made by
Really?
it coming in.
So that surprises me. I thought
it cannot be called a business.
I thought there was a huge market for noise. I'm confused.
There's there are pockets, you know what I mean, and there are, like anything, but I think the real stuff is always just done for mountains of money to make the thing. Drive the thing around, drive your little machines around, and then play for, and then hopefully get $5 on the way out of the door if you're lucky. More often than not, you're paying for something else. Something breaks while you're there, and you got to go buy another $300 something to fix it. But I feel like, there's a lot of but what I find in that sort of space is, obviously, yes, there's community involvement, but it's also, again, that kind of idea of holding space, or sort of creating these sort of this type of drone music, or this type of ambient music that I find myself making and enjoying. Is a lot of it is just sort of that time slows down, or there's, in a lot of ways, this sort of like ability to let your mind sort of just go on a walk by itself, and you have the stated thing that I'm an audience member and I'm here, but it's akin, I think, in some ways, to a spiritual experience too, or going to church, or any kind of religious service. A lot of times you're just sitting there, you just kind of sit on your hands and let your mind wander, and there's usually plenty of stuff to look at inside the temples or churches, or cathedrals. It's, your eyes can see things, your ears can hear things, but really you're just kind of sitting there and holding that space.
Well, you referenced Ian MacKaye earlier as sort of like the the storyteller of the DC scene. Years ago, I remember asking him. There was a point at which there was like two Black Flags touring, or some iteration, like Greg Ginn's thing and Rollins doing something. And I asked him kind of sarcastically, like, what's up with that? Like, what do you think about that? And he said very seriously, look, punk is gospel. There is absolutely a spiritual element, and the idea of holding space in a room where everyone is invited to sing along, literally, that has value. Like, that's important to people. And so, sure, you can diss on dueling flags, but there's something behind it, and it's serving a purpose.
Absolutely. Music is definitely one of those interesting sort of things as it plays into people's biographies. I've always held that whatever you listen to from 14 to 25 is going to be your music, and it doesn't mean that it's good. It doesn't mean that it has any value. Really, in the war of art, there's no way to really defend these points of view. It's just really, your time and place, where you were and when you were, and that's whatever came into your brain at that time. Really, just can imprint on your brain, and everything else that happens after that will always be seen through that filter. For better or worse, whatever that means. There's a lot of great music that can be discovered in that time, and there's a lot of other music that just it'll imprint on you, and that'll be what you make of it. And if you're a musician, you'll process through that filter for the rest of your career in one way or another, for better or worse. And it'll influence what you make, whether you're rebelling against it or processing through it, or filtering and whatever else is happening, whatever your designs are. Wow. Well, Seth, this has been incredible. It's been a really great talk. I feel like obviously there's tons more to talk about, and the book needs to be read. So you find yourself now in Portland, is that correct?
Yeah, I live in Portland.
Yeah. How are things there, and how are you? What does your community look like there in terms of how you interact with music and food and writing, and what does that kind of look like today?
Yeah, it's funny. Like I really left music behind in a lot of ways. Like I left it to turn to writing this book, and also my work changed from music to copywriting as a profession. But we're living in a funny era. I'm close with the band Unwound, and they're out playing shows
Hmm.
again. Like
Yeah.
someone said something like it's more of a reinvention than a reunion, and I agree with that. So it's
It's an interesting time for bands of that, especially now of that generation. Just as time goes,
yeah.
that what I mean. But yeah, they've the request is there, the audience is there, um, and
Yeah,
why
and it
not?
has
If they're able to connect to that body of work, it belongs to them. Like you said, rather than another version of that going out and doing something else.
and it has a different meaning now. I mean, I'm thinking of
Mm-hmm.
that band in particular, and the fact that one third of them, Vern, is now no longer alive to be in the band. And I think
Mm-hmm.
the reason they're able to play as a band now is because he's no longer there. And there's a lot of poignance in that.
Yeah.
But we appreciate it differently. Like we're old enough that not everyone has stuck around, and that sort of imbues it with a different kind of meaning. And that's what I look for personally. I want meaning out of art. I don't want to be dead to it anymore.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, I really thought. Yeah, I think I struggle in some ways with thinking about the reunionitis of the world, or how much navel gazing is necessary. In new in the idea of presenting this or rediscovering it, or is it left from I don't know, from the history bins into then repackaged sort of new commercialism.
Yeah, absolutely.
Is it but again, it's there. I respect the band for at least, or for any band who does this, kind of work, that it's your catalog. It's yours to be mined or exploited or shared or however, whatever, it's by virtue of your existence, and if these artists can embrace it, it's good for them. They can do it, because I just think the formatting of music, and obviously how music's sold and packaged and everything else today is so different than whenever that music was made.
Yeah.
That it's a whole different operation to be able to sort of share it. You know, Great. Well, yeah. Thank you so much for taking the time. Please let people know how can people find out about the book, find out more about you, and follow you. I know you have a Substack. What are some great ways?
Well, the challenge is spelling my name. If you can do that, you're halfway there. Lorinczi, Lorinczi. But if you can find me at sethlorinczi.com. You can go on Substack. My Substack is called Dispatches from the Fringe. You can look that up. And the book, I mean, the the book is available everywhere fine books are sold. But the best way to get it,
Where's the
from my
yeah?
perspective,
There we
is
go.
through the publisher, which is Spiral Path Collective, and that's just spiralpathcollective.com.
Yeah, that's great. Yeah, well, I encourage everybody to go out and grab it. Yeah, thank you so much for taking the time. I
Oh,
really look forward to reading more of the book, and hopefully being in touch down the road as more things come up.
Randy, I'm super grateful. This is so fun.
Yeah, it's great. Awesome. Thanks so
All
much.
right.
How rad was that? Seth, thank you so much for taking the time and sitting down with me for the pod. It was so insightful, so refreshing, and yeah, what a trip. Everybody go to Spiral Path Collective. That's all spelled out. No spaces, no hyphenates, just spiralpathcollective.com. There you can buy Seth's book, as well as tons of other great stuff that they sell there. You can also go to Seth Lorinczi at, oh gosh, let's do this again. You can go to sethlorinczi.com. That's his website, sethlorinczi.com. Also at Seth Lorinczi on Instagram. And don't forget the Substack, Dispatches from the Fringe. Substack link is to trackseth.substack.com for all things Seth writing. Super cool. A really informative, incredible book, incredible thinker, incredible just perspective on the world. And, you know, I thought really a new idea and way of approaching life. So, yeah, I appreciate it. I hope everybody has a romantic weekend in whatever way that is, whatever way you celebrate your romance or get into the groove. Have a good one this weekend, and I'll be back on Monday. And remember, send me your tracks. I want to hear demos. I want to hear songs. I want to hear whatever you got. I want to hear weird band names. That's hyphenatehalftime@gmail.com, or find me on Instagram @RandySRandall, and send it in. I want to review it. I want my son to review it and give you his honest opinion from Southern California, 5th grader. He'll tell you what's up. He'll tell you what he thinks about it. And we'll talk about it on Monday's halftime show. Our wrap up. Thank you, everybody. Be safe. Be well. Have a good weekend. Bye.
I hate working in restaurants. It's awful. It's brutal work. I don't have the temperament for it at all. But I could write about food.